Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 11th of October, comes to you from London. And quite big falls on the markets last night. The Nasdaq down over 4%, and we're seeing that spreading, of course, into Europe and Asia today. Looking at the dollar, we were lower on the dollar index. Just pushing lower, which allowed the euro to actually rise further. So we see the euro here now looking quite stronger against the dollar. The big beneficiary, of course, safe haven is Japanese yen. Dollar sinking lower there. So we've seen the last week or so that's been happening. So it tends to be a lead indicator, and there's a flight to the yen at times of concern. Seeing the sterling chart improving against the dollar as well, and against the euro, we've made a medium-term transition, so we're looking more bullish there. Against the Swiss franc, we're looking better as well, and against the Aussie dollar, holding on there. So sterling looking stronger all the time. Bitcoin down 5%, so not benefiting from the turmoil in markets, down to the 6,100 level. So Bitcoin really has been very flat for the last few months. Looking at the S&P 500 index, the key thing is, are we seeing the beginning of a bear trend? Still too early to say. The medium-term chart is bullish. We're seeing a lot of volatility towards the end of this run, and that normally is a signal that the trend might be ending. And of course, the short-term chart has been bearish now for about a week, and so we're not surprised to see these falls. The Nasdaq actually is pushing below the cloud, but we want to see a few days below the cloud to be sure that this trend is ending, but it's certainly a time to be cautious, and the short-term chart is bearish as well. A shortage of downside targets. What we'll see is we'll get a downside target off this thrust move down. The thing we have to worry about is a recovery and then a move lower. That's what we have to watch for, and so it's too early to say until we see that. So basically we need to see the lower high and then the lower low, as per Dow theory. Looking at the Dow Jones, looking pretty worrying as well, down 3%, so had a big fall yesterday. And of course, the Russell 2000 index has actually been underperforming for a good few weeks. A lot of stocks in the US have been selling off. The futures this morning, the E-mini is down, the S&P is down just under 0.2%, and the Nasdaq E-mini has recovered a little bit, so not looking as weak. The FTSE 100 has been seesawing a little bit this morning, was down nearly 2% at the open, but actually has recovered, now down 1.2%, but looking very bearish for the FTSE, and the long-term chart now heading into bearish territory. So European markets generally not looking as good as the US, and of course the US falling away is now making that fall further. FTSE 250 looking bearish as well, not quite yet on the long-term chart. The DAX starting to look very bearish as well. Long-term chart starting to deteriorate. We do have a short-term target downside for the DAX of 6%, so that's quite key as well. And the CAC Courant actually also looking quite bearish now too, with the medium-term chart clearly bearish. The Japanese market was down 3.5% overnight, so we are seeing falls there. The stronger yen not helping, of course. The Hang Seng down 3.5%. So now starting to enter long-term bearish territory, and the market that we've probably been most worried about all year is the Chinese market, and the Shanghai index now closing below levels that we saw back in 2016. So it's taking us back to levels of 2014, 4-year lows on China, and that's activated this downside target some 44% lower. So we've got lots of downside targets. Chinese stocks in the short term we've got 5 and 7% downside targets, but the long-term targets are very scary indeed. So very little support for Chinese stocks at the moment. The Hang Seng performed relatively well, only down 1.5%, and the Aussie market was down 2.7%, and looking bearish there now medium term as well. Brent crude has fallen back quite sharply yesterday. It was sitting at $82.40. So we are still holding the long-term and medium-term bull trends, but short-term we're bearish, and WTI much the same picture, bearish in the short term. US NatGas actually has held up very well, and it's sitting at $3.25. It's a bright spot at the moment against all the turmoil in markets. Gold actually also holding steady at 11.97 this morning. moving to short-term bullish, as we might expect. There's been a flight to gold, and silver not yet as bullish as gold. US 10-year yields sitting at 3.17%, turning short-term bearish, but the medium and long-term chart still very bullish, of course. And we're seeing a little bit of reaction in German bond prices this morning, up slightly. Taking a look at the markets, as I said, tech stocks were very badly hit yesterday, with the Nasdaq down 0.4%. We're looking at some of the bellwethers. Amazon was down 6%, but still holding on to its bull trend and still outperforming the Nasdaq itself by 36% this year. Taking a look at Apple, also looking pretty strong, outperforming the market some 15% this year, 16% higher, and the trend's still in train there. Taking a look at the shorter term charts, taking a look at Google, for example, Google actually has been a stock we have been quite worried about, and here we see medium term we have turned bearish. It's underperformed the Nasdaq by 7% this year, so Google is not looking so good. Some of the other stocks to watch were Tesla. It actually didn't fall so heavily yesterday. News of James Murdoch becoming chairman helped, so only down 2.5%. And if we look at Netflix was the worst performer in the Nasdaq, down 8%, although it still has outperformed the Nasdaq this year, but it's has really seen some big falls there. Taking a look at the FTSE this morning, just looking at some of the stocks. Of course, as we'd expect, a lot of stocks falling. There's a handful of stocks rising. Randgold and Sky don't really count because they're in bid situations. We're seeing Tesco just bucking the trend there, but it was nearly all down at the open. We're starting to see some stocks recovering in the FTSE. The big fallers, Hargreaves Lansdown down 6% this morning, has fallen quite significantly, taking into bearish territory over the last few weeks. Financial stocks we're seeing here, things like London Stock Exchange, Schroders. We're seeing a lot of the financials, banks all being hit. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.